Welcome to GameSpot Live. I'm Greg Kasavin here to tell you all about Metroid Prime for the GameCube, and I'd like to get all the hyperbole out of the way first. Metroid Prime is really the best GameCube game to date. It's also the best Metroid game to date, and it's one of the most atmospheric games that's ever been created. It's really, above all, if you're a fan of the Metroid series, you'll be thrilled at how faithfully Metroid Prime captures the essence of that great series in 3D. Everyone had a right to be really skeptical when Nintendo announced that the GameCube Metroid game was going to be a 3D shooter of some sort. We all thought that it was just going to be some other sci-fi themed first-person shooter with a Metroid license slapped on, but it's really anything but that. It's a superficial resemblance to first-person shooters is purely superficial, and above all, it's a Metroid game through and through, and it's even if you haven't played a bunch of Metroid games in the past, you'll find in it just a really original, really slick, polished, incredibly well-produced game. As in all Metroid games, in Metroid Prime, you play as the interstellar space bounty hunter Samus Aran, who once again is after the space pirates from Zebes and their kind of awful genetic experiments. They're apparently experimenting with the jellyfish-like evil Metroid creatures, and Samus has trailed them down to a planet called Talon 4, where they apparently have some sort of secret base of operations. So she lands, and she's going to have to find out what these space pirates have in store and kind of clean them out once and for all. It's a similar premise to pretty much every other Metroid game, and like every other Metroid game, in fact, Metroid Prime really doesn't have much of a story or a plot to it. This is something that might actually put some people off. They'll be surprised to find that they're kind of just thrust into this huge world and left to kind of explore it on their own and figure things out, rather than be strung along by some kind of long-winded narrative or anything like that. While there isn't much story to Metroid Prime, there's certainly a lot of context. One of the things that Samus is able to do is use different visors for her suit to help her kind of perceive her surroundings in different ways. She begins with a combat visor, which is kind of the standard view. It's got a radar that shows any enemies in the vicinity and lets her easily acquire targets. And she's also got what's called the scan visor, with which she could analyze objects in the environment and kind of detect important information about them. She can scan enemies to find out their weaknesses. She can scan computer terminals to kind of translate pirate logs. And a lot of this stuff is optional, and some of it isn't. And it's sort of an interesting plot device because it forces you to kind of read once in a while. These kind of text windows appear, giving you a bit of information, but all of it is written in this kind of cool sci-fi pseudoscience fashion, lending the whole game kind of a really consistent logic, and it serves to really progress whatever semblance of a plot the game has along. For example, when you're finally in the thick of the space pirates' haven, and you're finding these memos about how they're on kind of heightened alert, looking for who they call the Hunter. In addition to the combat visor and the scan visor, Samus also later acquires a thermal vision visor and also an X-ray visor. Both of these have really, really cool effects and let you see different things that would normally be imperceptible to you. Like the X-ray visor, you can detect kind of ghostly images and illusions and things like that, whereas the thermal visor lets you, of course, see in the dark, but also pick up on kind of weak energy signatures. So you might find power-ups, hidden behind breakable walls or things like that. The way you switch between different visors is that you just simply press in a direction on the digital pad on the controller, and likewise you use the C stick, the right analog stick, to switch between your 4 primary firing modes, at least once you get them. You initially start out with Samus's classic beam weapon, the power beam, which just fires these kind of superheated rapid-fire shots. and she'll later get the wave beam, which shoots electrical charges, the ice beam that freezes enemies, and then the plasma beam that can disintegrate them altogether. One of the nice things about Metroid Prime compared with previous Metroid games is none of the weapons ever go obsolete. In previous Metroids, you gain new beam weapons that replace your old ones, but here all of the weapons remain useful throughout the game, and you upgrade them with kind of a charge ability and various special attacks. So by the end of the game, Samus actually has a great deal of ways that she could deal with her various foes. But Metroid Prime isn't a first-person shooter. It doesn't control like one, it doesn't play like one. For example, in most first-person shooters, you can readily look up and down, but Samus has a bit of difficulty doing that. You have to press and hold the right shoulder button in order to adjust her vertical aim, and it's kind of an interesting touch. At first it seems pretty clunky, and it even looks clunky. You see her actually lift or lower her arm physically to aim at high or low targets. But then you realize that she's wearing this big, huge suit, and she basically doesn't even have a neck. So it sort of makes sense that she can't easily aim upwards or downwards. So that's kind of in pretty sharp contrast to most first-person shooters. And at the same time, unlike most shooter characters, Samus can really, really easily aim. You just click the left shoulder button, and Samus instantly acquires a target. So if you're fighting kind of a half dozen little bugs or something, you just squeeze the left shoulder button a bunch of times, and you could easily pick them all off as though she's some kind of RoboCop or something like that. She can aim almost flawlessly. So the challenge of the combat really isn't about aiming, it's more about avoiding damage or absorbing damage, since her suit can actually take quite a bit of punishment. When you lock onto a target, you can perform evasive maneuvers by jumping side to side to avoid damage, and also strafe around the target to keep it in your sights while avoiding its own fire. So Samus certainly isn't sluggish, and in fact she's capable of some pretty cool maneuvers. For instance, she can jump really, really high, even by default, and later on she'll gain an ability to where she can jump even farther. Jumping may be an aspect of Metroid Prime that worries you. How did it turn out? First-person jumping sequences almost always are horrible in first-person shooters, but somehow, some way, the designers of Metroid Prime made the jumping work. Part of it is that the view while you're jumping actually seems to move with the trajectory of the jump, so you don't have to adjust your viewpoint yourself while you're in midair. It kind of does that for you. But anyway, in practice, it just becomes very, very logical to where you can judge your distances and time your jumps. You'll still make these big, huge, death-defying leaps over huge chasms, although you can never die from falling, actually. Samus doesn't even take damage, no matter how far she falls. So the game's got exciting jumps in it, and yet they aren't especially difficult. You land where you think you're going to land, and it just works. And it wouldn't be a Metroid game without a bunch of jumping sequences, so it's yet another aspect of the series that the designers at Retro Studios really nailed. Another central mechanic is that Samus can roll up into a ball. This is going to look really, really weird to someone who's never played a Metroid game before. You have this kind of big football player-looking gal who all of a sudden turns into a perfect sphere and starts rolling around like a bowling ball. It's pretty bizarre, but it's one of the really unique things about Metroid. It always has been, and it's handled better in Metroid Prime than in any other Metroid game before it. There are a lot of really fun, creative sequences involving the morph ball, and you power it up with different abilities like a boost and also the ability to climb up vertical magnetic rails and all kinds of stuff like that. There are just plenty of neat little morph ball sequences, like you'll come up against these enemies that try to, they can't actually see you, but they can feel that the morph ball is there, and they'll pick you up and spit you out back at your entry point if you aren't careful. But you could drop a bomb, which they'll think is you, and they'll swallow the bomb and blow up. It's really quite clever. You can switch to the morph ball at any time, to which the game kind of casually switches to a third-person perspective, and the mechanics of it really work quite well. It lets you get around really fast and do a bunch of fun stuff. And one of the stranger touches, the world of Talon 4 even has skateboarding-style half-pipes on it, and you'll see Samus kind of rolling up and down these half-pipes as though she's a skateboarder. It sounds ridiculous, but it's actually really quite fun. There's a lot of good stuff that can be said about Metroid Prime, but probably the single most impressive thing about the game is that it's just one completely seamless experience. There are no loading times at all in the game, not even when you first turn on your GameCube. You basically see the GameCube logo, you see the Nintendo logo, and then you're at the title screen, and then you can start playing, and from there on, the game never ever breaks you out of the experience. Using the convention of the series that passageways in the game are divided up by doors that need to be shot open. The designers were able to make new data kind of stream in transparently in the background, but you don't really need to know that. Effectively, you'll just find that you're able to go from one incredibly detailed scene to the next without any kind of delay, and this just makes the game unbelievably atmospheric. You're just struck with the sense that you're really in this big, huge alien world, free to go almost wherever you want, and free to kind of look for new ways of reaching areas that you can see maybe off in the distance, but you can't actually get to. The variety in the environments is as impressive as the environments themselves. You'll go from kind of boiling hot pools of lava straight into kind of snow-covered tundras, and it's really just quite striking to seamlessly travel from one of these types of areas into the other. The world of the game is quite huge, and yet every single portion of it just looks like it was meticulously designed, or rather it just looks natural. It really, you know, these don't come across like levels in a shooter. It's just one big world, and that's exactly what Metroid fans would want to see in a game like this. Ironically, the criticisms that can be leveled against Metroid Prime are more criticisms of the Metroid series rather than of Metroid Prime itself, which is really, really true to its roots. One thing that you'll note is that enemies respawn in areas when you come back to them. It's kind of an odd thing, you know. You'll wipe out a bunch of space pirates and you'll come back a few minutes later and they'll all be back. This is something that's always been true of the Metroid series, and it definitely keeps things lively, but maybe it's not terribly realistic. Also, there is quite a bit of backtracking in the game. You'll gain new abilities, and then you'll use them to go back through previous areas you've already visited. Backtracking is sort of a big game design no-no these days. People seem to think they hate it, but Metroid Prime actually handles it really well, because you'll go back through areas you've visited, but using completely different powers. You'll feel so much stronger when you revisit the areas you've seen before that it really makes for a pretty cool experience. These enemies that maybe once gave you trouble will fall easily to you when you have all your powerful new weapons and stuff like that. Also, someone somewhere, I suppose, could probably complain that Metroid Prime doesn't have any multiplayer options in it, but I don't really see that as any sort of detriment to the game. It's just something worth pointing out, I guess. The more you play, the more cool little details you'll notice. There are just all these really amazing graphical touches in the game that are very subtle, and yet you'll catch on to them and you'll appreciate them. When a bright light occurs next to Samus, you'll sometimes even see her face reflected back in her visor. You'll see kind of sheets of water pour down the helmet when she exits from a pool of water. And when she switches to the X-ray visor, you'll actually see her hand manipulating different switches inside her gun arm. It's really just a great touch. They're all the sorts of things that the developers, you know, arguably didn't need to put into the game, but they just make a world of difference in the end toward making this game so atmospheric and so enjoyable. The game looks terrific and has audio to match. All the various monsters sound different. All the beam weapons create kind of the piercing, kind of shrill sounds that you'd expect from them, and there's a lot of ambient noise just to really draw you in. It fits right up there with the graphics, and supports ProLogic 2 setups if you have them, and to really just create an all-encompassing experience. You'll hear everything going on around you, and it can be quite useful tactically just to hear the various noises, because not only can you hear enemies approaching from different angles, but you'll even sometimes notice the low whir of hidden power-ups in your vicinity. Metroid Prime is a big game. It'll take you probably around 20 hours to finish the first time through, though you could easily spend longer looking for all the various secrets. Finishing it unlocks a hard mode where enemies are more plentiful and tougher, and since it's such a good game, there's every chance that you'll want to play it again. It's just enjoyable to go through more than once. Also, if you have a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Metroid Fusion for the GBA, you could link those two together using the sold separately GameCube to GBA link cable to unlock a few extras in Metroid Prime. For one thing, you could play through the game using Samus's suit from Metroid Fusion, which unfortunately doesn't look as good as her Metroid Prime outfit, so it's not that big of a deal. The cooler extra is that you can unlock a perfect port of the original Metroid game for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which actually holds up surprisingly well. And if you've never played the original Metroid before, it's really interesting to see how far along many of the original game mechanics have come in Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime is really an amazing accomplishment on pretty much every level. It's just extremely successful. It's original. It's memorable. It's got everything that's good about gaming in it, except maybe some really interesting narrative. But that's hardly important when there's a game that's so atmospheric and so much about exploration and investigation. It's really your own kind of personal journey through the world of the game that matters. Who'd have thought that some unknown Texas-based developer could have created what's easily the best game in the Metroid series so far? And that's no easy feat, considering every game in the Metroid series before this one has been excellent. It's of course a must-have game if you have a GameCube, and even if you don't have a GameCube, yes, it's pretty much worth plunking down $200, $150 for the system and $50 for the game, just to play this game. It's really one of the best gaming experiences to be had this year, and that's really all that needs to be said.